Tonight is our, it's March version of the Artist Journey Speaker Series. And if you've watched this before, you know it's gone through quite an evolution. So my name is Carrie Dorsky. I'm the operations coordinator at the Artisan Center. I started in this role in January of 2020, and then the world shut down. So we had to pivot virtually. And you may have never ever seen me do this from my couch, but I thought it called for a good, comfy, casual conversation tonight. And you may have heard me speak that this is transitioning to a recorded podcast starting in the fall. So I've got a couple left here. We've got March with Lisa that we're doing right now. I have April with artist Andrew Linskins. And then we always end our 9-month series with May with our group of residents. And so the residents have been with me for about a year. And in May, they will all come together. We'll do a little panel. They'll talk about their year, the journey, that what they've learned. And that's probably my favorite one. It's my favorite way to end the series. So we may always end up doing that one on a video. But before I ramble too much, if anybody joins us live, please feel free to unmute, ask questions, join the conversation. Add questions in the chat, things like that. I will make sure when this gets posted with the recording, we will put it on our social media, that we include links to Lisa's website and things like that. So if you want to find her virtually afterwards. But before I ramble too long, Lisa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I know we had to postpone it a week due to a cold. I'm still a little raspy, bear with me. But thank you again for inviting me to talk today. My name is Lisa Wicka. I am an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, teaching primarily printmaking, some drawing classes, and then I also teach professional practices there as well. I've been there for roughly about 5 years, coming up on 5 years, was up in Marinette for about 4 years before that. My undergraduate degree is from the University of Central Florida, actually in studio art and animation. And then I spent 5 years in New York City before going to grad school at Purdue University, where I focused on printmaking and drawing. So yeah, happy to talk about some different things today. Maybe we're leaning a little into that professional practices.
I think that's where you and I kind of, I am at a 2-year college, right? But that's what I teach people. And then you're at a 4-year college and that's what you teach people.
Yeah.
So Lisa and I have kind of gotten to know each other, I don't know, over the past couple of years. I took your Lego printmaking workshop at New Art Space. That was very fun. And now I have called Lisa in to come in and visit with our residents and do critique with them and a few other things. So when we were talking about professional practices and portfolios and things that artists need to have in their repertoire or have prepared, or I don't know what I'm trying to say, that kind of thing, to be a professional artist, Lisa was the first person that popped into my head. And so I kind of called in this favor and said, would you join me? We can hang out, pretend we're just like having coffee together like we have before. And let's chat about what's important. And I'm gonna ramble a little too much, but I just attended a conference, the Business of Art conference down in Madison by Dane Arts, and they used a really cool conference app. And a lot of people in the discussion were talking about, where are you at with your portfolio? What does your portfolio look like? Do you have a digital version? Do you carry around a paper one? Like, how prepared are you? How many images? Have you narrowed it down? That kind of thing. And I found the conversation kind of fascinating because it really spanned the gamut.
Yeah, the notion that there's even one answer to that is hilarious. Yeah, like, it's so complex. Yeah.
So you are a printmaker, so
Yes.
2D art.
I actually like really consider myself a mixed media printmaker. So I'm often mixing different techniques. I'm sometimes drawing on those prints or sometimes sculptural elements. So I do kind of dabble in a lot of different things, but primarily printmaking is at the root of most of what I do.
Awesome. So when you are teaching a professional practices class to 4-year undergrad students, what kind of things are you guys talking about?
So most of the students that are taking that class with me are close to graduation, also very close to senior show. So our senior show is not a requirement, but we strongly encourage it. And this class helps them to prepare for that senior show. So that if we're talking specifically like towards that exhibition, we're then talking about artist statements, right? So that artist statement that's going to be up next to their work. We're talking framing. right? We're talking artist bios, matting, framing, that sort of thing. Documenting work. We just last week were in our lighting studio taking photos of work. This week we've been working on general Photoshop and like how to edit those images. And they have a couple semester long projects, and then everything we do like fits into those projects. So one is a website, right? So when you're saying portfolio, I actually very often think your website is your portfolio. So working on a website that can be shared, right? So that's one thing. So that's where the statement, the bio, those things can like tuck in. And then the other thing is they do a mock proposal. So they can choose from a grad school like application, a grant that they find, or an artist residency. So then they have to get everything together, files the size that they want to be, statements of intent or proposals written out, and kind of make that package. And I think that package making is so important to so many things that we do.
Absolutely. We talk about it all the time too. And that dovetails really nicely with kind of what we cover in the residency program. So there's a lot of overlap there. And I think a lot about applications. We did, I think it was a couple of years ago, in an artist journey series, we had a bunch of people who run arts organization talking to artists about how to apply to their things, and like what to consider and following those instructions. And it's hard.
I was just talking to a student yesterday, and I could say my age, but maybe I won't. But thinking about how I looked for exhibitions or opportunities once I graduated, or even while I was in undergrad, and how that compares to students now. And I think I knew this, but sometimes until you say something out loud, you're like, oh, that's actually really true. And I think when I was graduating, or, like, we were scrappy. We were like pop up over here, going into coffee shops, like asking, sort of things. And we were like making it happen. And I do think now there's so many opportunities around on these websites. Now the challenge is to like sift through this and see what is a good opportunity and not what's a red flag, who's just taking your money, right? And then that's sort of the obstacle that my students now are having, or me too, right? As things have changed.
Absolutely.
So we do a big talk on like what to look at, and look at their website, and what artists are they representing? Are they only doing juried shows? Like that sort of thing has become important. And until I said that out loud, I was like, oh, that is their journey, right? Is like
absolutely
navigating what's a legitimate opportunity and maybe what's not.
When I was at UWGB and towards the end of my undergrad there, we were doing, I was helping out with juried exhibitions. I was interning at the Art Garage, and we were doing a juried exhibition there. And that was when people submitted on CDs and flash drives. And I was the lucky intern who had to enter each CD into the desktop computer and like save the folder, And now I think about like, oh, you guys have it so easy. You just like on your computer, just add the image to your application is a no-brainer.
But there's some things are overwhelming in a way that they weren't for us, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, that was also really easy because you could weed people out super fast. Like, oh, their files weren't named right or whatever, like just technical things, right? That was like, okay, they didn't meet the parameters at all. But now I think people pay really close attention to your photo editing, right?
Yes, because it's not a most people have access to be able to edit the photos a little bit. That's all assumed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We during the residency program, I have a woman named Kat Gottlieb. She did an artist journey with me in September, and she does a presentation with the residents in the fall about setting up their studio for efficiency. And I have heard her give the presentation 3 times now. And the last thing she ends with is adding in documentation and inventorying, pricing as part of your studio practice, and which is brilliant. And to be honest with you, I never wrapped my head around it until this year. And so that's what I always tell my residents too, is like, you're going to be flooded with information. You're going to learn a ton. You may not be able to implement everything right away,
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know?
it's not gonna all make sense for you at
Right.
this right at the same time.
But
I
like,
always
remember it, take down the notes, take the nuggets of information, and continuous improvement.
I tell right people that whatever handouts you get, keep them. And I kind of get like a chuckle from that. And I was like, oh, I'm
Oh,
not playing, right? I still have handouts from like my undergrad, I think that because
yeah.
especially if you're going into teaching, right?
Yeah.
Like you have all these how to from being a
Yep.
student or doing something like your program, you have all these guidelines that
Yep.
just having them printed in a place that you can go to is incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, I still quote things from professors. There's those little nuggets of wisdom that
Mhm.
stick with you forever.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to refer to, like, I have textbooks even. I had some really cool museum textbooks that I absolutely love. And I have notes in all the margins and,
Yeah.
like gold.
Yeah, in grad school, I had a couple classes where instead of having a book, the professors put like a collection of readings together and then spiral bound it. And I feel like those
Nice.
are like
Yeah.
treasures, right?
Like
Because
tailor made.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's so much I don't have to go dig for. It's all like
Exactly.
organized around this theme. Like one was like design in America or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's all these articles that are like
Yep.
relevant and yeah, I made sure to hang on to those.
For sure. So
Yeah.
I bring in a web designer, graphic designer named Craig Bauer to meet with our residents to talk about what a website entails. And then he also does a presentation on social media and branding and marketing and all of those really fun things, right? Um, so when you're talking to artists about developing their website, or we'll call it portfolio, what are you telling them to include?
When we talk about websites, I encourage because I know a lot of our students they're not like gonna code their own
Okay.
website. So we look at some different templates that are
Yep.
available. But before we even do that, we look at other artists' web pages. So, right, and seeing what they like, what they
Yep.
don't like. And I would say I do spend some time on just like ease of navigation, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you're applying to something and I have to click 5 times, like I'm the one deciding something, I have to click 5 times to like see a work of yours. That's a red flag to me, right? Like
Yep.
I might give up, right? So
For sure.
making sure that things are clean to the
Yep.
point, right? You can see and navigate that website
Yep.
easily. I usually suggest, right, the bio, a
Yep.
statement. It could be a specific statement for your website. It doesn't need to be like a super long
Right.
website or statement, excuse me. Contact info, right? Your social media info. If you have a newsletter, you could have a sign up for a newsletter. But we've had some conversations of like, our websites
Yeah.
even important anymore, right? And I think
Sure.
if you view it as a portfolio, it's where your
Yep.
finished work goes, right?
Absolutely.
So for social media, you might have in progress, you might have cropped views, you might
Yep.
have your face in there, like whatever things you choose to do, there's different audiences for those things.
Yep.
So do I have a ton of people going to my website every day? No, right? But when I apply to something, right, or then that stuff is ready to go. So I'm not like
Exactly.
scrambling
Yep.
to assemble a bunch of stuff together. And most of those templates too, if you wanted to turn something off, there's like older work, you can
Yep.
just like turn that off. It doesn't go away, right? It's still there for you. It's still like
Yep.
can even be part of like how you look at your inventory.
Yep.
Um, but you can control, right, what's forward facing, which is really
For
nice.
sure. So
Yeah.
I actually ended up hiring Craig to create my website. I
Mm-hmm.
decided that I had enough on my plate and that was something that I should hire out, right?
It's a beast. Yep.
Yeah, it is. It is
Mm-hmm.
hard. And I'm like, oh, I have a full-time job and then, making of the art, right? I'm like, okay, so sometimes you have to hire people to do things. And that's literally the exact process. I started off by like scouring the internet for websites I loved and websites I didn't love. And then because I'm not only a visual artist, that I am an arts administrator and I work in kind of the arts world, Craig had a really interesting kind of viewpoint for me. And he said, you have to think about websites now as resumes or like living resumes too, and so you think about like if somebody's trying to find me on the internet, I want to paint that whole picture for them. And so my website serves again as a portfolio, but as like a who in the world is Carrie Dorsky, right? Like and so, I don't have any e-commerce on there. I don't use my website to sell. That's not a goal of mine at the moment. But it is a great place. You can see my face. You can read a little bit about me. You can see works that I'm working on. And then I have a little page about like current projects or where I have stuff on display.
Sure, like a
where to
blog
find
sort of
me.
thing.
Exactly. Like highlights, things I want people to know that are important. And it's really served me well. I actually the traffic is pretty consistent, especially when I do apply to things or post it somewhere or I attend an event and I give out business cards. You can see people are like, "Oh, what is this?" Or
I don't share this with my sister. Maybe tell them this. I forever ago, oh my God, I don't know, probably for like 20 years already, I have a Google alert
yeah, me too.
for my name and
Yep, me
art
too.
after it. And, and that maybe sounds, strange, but there's times where people have shared my work,
Yes.
posted about it.
Yep.
And I would have never known unless
Exactly.
I got that little alert. And I'm like, why did I get this alert? And I was like, oh, somebody has shared, my work or wrote about a little blurb somewhere.
Yeah.
It's so
It
easy to
happens.
do. You don't have to think about it ever again. It'll just like tell you, right, when something pops up. And I found that a really helpful tool too. Also on my website, I think putting your CV as a link to a shared document. That way you can update that. As I say that, like, don't look too closely at mine. Mine's the old one. I have to update it. I'm actually working on a new website.
Nice.
I use Cargo Collective.
Yeah.
And I've used it for a long time when things were not so template friendly.
Yeah.
So I'm working, I think I'm using Wix right now to try to design another one, but it takes a long time. I tell my students, I think when I first did mine, but I was dipping into code, right, and everything, it probably took me a solid summer.
Yep.
To document, get good images, right, get it to look the way I wanted it to look, that sort of thing.
And the other advice I give to people, and maybe for students too, is sometimes bartering this work is totally worth it. So I had a friend of mine, a professional photographer, come take photos of me in my studio in progress, surrounded by my artwork because I knew I was going to start working on this website. I knew I needed some headshots taken and we bartered, which is great. And then I just worked with an artist who was a woodworker and wrote him some, I kind of interviewed him so I could write his bio and help him with that stuff. That's a strength of mine, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a strength of a lot of artists. And so I did that for him and he's building me shelves for my studio. So that's the kind of thing, like, especially, and Chris Stiles said this to me when I was at GB, and that you don't really realize until after you've graduated that the students in that classroom with you are a wealth of knowledge and experience. And you don't realize it at the time, but leveraging those relationships can serve you so well in the long run.
Yes. Yeah. And I still am really close with people I went to undergrad with. And by that really close, I mean that like personally and professionally, like we've shown together when I've worked at a couple galleries, I've invited them to show and vice versa. Like we really have created this exchange that we support each other in whatever way we can, right? It doesn't always work out or timing, whatever, but like I've invited them to talk to my students, about something virtually like this. And
absolutely.
And that stemmed from the early 2000s. Going
for
to school,
sure.
like how long those relationships can last. And it's hard to have a support system outside of school, right? And I know that's like what your residency program might start to offer, right? Is that collaboration, that community.
Sure.
It is very difficult to do that on your own outside of a program of some sort.
We talk a lot about how being an artist can be a really lonely profession if you don't find your network and develop those relationships. And some of the feedback I've received, this is our fourth year doing the residency program, is that they're so grateful to have somebody to talk about art and running a business with that's not family or friends, because they don't really get it.
Yeah.
And so I instituted regular one-on-ones with them because I have found that to be so powerful and helpful for them to just have somebody to talk to. Like,
Yeah.
even if it's, I'm struggling with this art making technique, and I can be like, well, check out this person or meet this person or whatever.
Mm.
Or it's, my website sucks, or, like those are the kind of things. It doesn't matter what we talk about. It's
Yeah.
just nice to have a sense of community.
And I have said to students, I'm like, this maybe sounds mean, but like, no one's going to care about your work as much as they do right now, right? Like, I'm a professor in front of
Yes.
you. You're surrounded by people who are also interested in your work and
Yes.
are working on their own journey, right? Like,
Yep.
this is the time, right, for
Absolutely.
that discussion, for that growth. It's
Yep.
really difficult to recreate that
Yep.
sort of environment.
It is. And I don't think I realized, as a young teenager going to college, right? Like right out of high school, how important my relationships with my professors would be.
Mm.
That's the other thing. So I'll back up for context. If you were watching this and give you a little backstory here. So I
Sure.
brought Lisa in to do critique with 5 of our current residents back in February. And then I talked with the residents afterwards. And a story I shared with the residents was, I just had an opening reception at New Art Space in, like I said, ended up being end of January, beginning of February. And a bunch of my former professors were there. And it was wonderful. And they were professors who I took many classes with. So, like Carol Emmons, I did all of my foundational courses in. I did all of my drawing classes in. Chris Style was there, and I took many classes with her. And I looked at my residents and I said, when I was their student, they were heavy on critique, right? They are pushing me. They are helping me develop as an artist. That's their role. And then as this adult and they're coming to this opening reception, it was like celebratory, right?
Mhm.
And they were there not only to support the community and me, but in my artwork, I'm still doing the one thing Carol Emmons used to always critique me on. She used to always talk to me about vignetting my subject matter. And
Okay.
it's so funny to me that that was like always the thing, always. And now I still do it to this day. And that's not the point of it, right? Like, my relationship with her has evolved,
Mhm.
and it was so exciting to me. And so I was telling the residents, like, critique is critique in that moment. It doesn't mean that person is like critiquing you as a person, right?
No,
It doesn't
not at
mean
all.
that your work is always going to be the same. Your work is going to continually evolve. So I just think, and everything kind of comes back to these relationships and the network you build as an artist and how important that is to being an artist.
Mhm. And I mean, before you started recording too, we were talking about rejection, right? And how significant that is. Like, you have to learn how to cope with that or let it
Yep.
run off your back. Some people, every time you get a rejection, might put, $1 in a jar for a treat later, or you collage on top of it, or
Yep.
whatever, right? Kind of develop a ritual around
Exactly.
that. I sometimes like to think, when I get rejected, oh, I don't have to frame that now.
Like, I don't have to ship that,
Oh, I
right?
don't have to ship it, right? Like, so, and that's a way for me to just kind of be like,
Yeah,
I mean, it's okay. Like, I don't have to spend
exactly.
more money than on this
Yeah,
thing. But if I were to get in, I'd be excited too.
for
But
sure.
right, kind of try to figure out, yeah, and that, I think that critique is another area where it can be hard,
Oh
right?
my
It can be
God.
hard to hear things. And I
Yeah.
think too, like, especially our students that are close to their senior show, like, I remember being like, or even thinking of like my graduate degree, right? Like, coming up to my show, consumed,
Yep.
right? By all of that, like being absolutely consumed and feeling like everything I'm making is like an extension of my body,
It is.
and then
Yep.
if anybody
Absolutely.
says anything, it was like a stab,
Yep.
I remember like
Yeah.
that being an emotional time. And it's hard, right? But the more you do it, the more you hear, the more
Yep.
you are play like with your work, that becomes easier, right? It's
Yep.
like, oh, this didn't work. It's not me, right? Like, it's not me. Maybe I don't need to change everything, but maybe I need to look at it from a different perspective instead of like, your idea sucks, right? That's not right. But we have this whole like area around your idea, and learning how to kind of bounce around, I think, that idea until you like find what sticks is takes a while to learn.
Yeah. And it takes a while to also know that you can say no to feedback.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
like, you don't have to take every feedback
So
everybody
much of it
gives
is
you. Like,
projection too.
it
Like,
is.
I think I know what you wanted to do, and did you work at that and it might be like, that's not what I wanted at
You're
all. And I'm
making an
like,
assumption, or
oh, okay, then tell me what you meant.
exactly.
Yeah. I think critiques really they should be a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And kind of a back and forth, because I'm guessing what you're thinking by what
Right.
visual you made, right? It's
Yep. And it's a
a
great
complicated thing.
learning moment.
Mhm.
And this is something I also said before we started recording, is that it teaches you, reaffirms that the way you talk about your work and the way you talk about yourself is super important.
Mhm.
Like, if
Yes.
you and I had just met and I was trying to tell you about my artwork, that would be an important conversation. Like,
Mm.
that would be something I would want to make sure there's certain things I'm telling you so that you do understand and don't have to make a bunch of assumptions.
Yeah, in my professional practice, our first lecture is how to talk about your work,
It's
right?
so
And to
hard.
start it's so hard. And thinking about maybe how much time you have, where you are, who
Yep.
you're talking to.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
is somebody going to be maybe more interested in your process than
Yep.
like your concepts? And sort of like learning how to feel out those situations. But I always think having, a elevator
Yeah.
statement, right? A
Absolutely.
couple sentences, if you
Yep.
can say what you're doing, both process and concept, like in a couple
Yep.
sentences, then you're good.
Yep.
And if you practice enough, it should just fall out of your face, even if you are a little nervous.
For sure. Yeah, at that conference I attended in Madison, one of the seminars I attended, is for a guy who runs one of the startup hubs in Madison, and he did an exercise where you write your elevator speech with a Mad Lib and
Sure.
fun and games, right? But the core that I kind of tell people is that part you said where you know who you're talking to. And this is a conversation I had with current and former residents on Tuesday night. I gave like a mini version of the conference I attended to a bunch of people
Mhm.
because I learned a lot of cool stuff. And we were talking about interacting with a customer. That's going to be different. That's a different conversation than interacting with somebody at a museum,
Mhm.
a professor, right?
Yep.
A friend, a family member. Like, all those target audience segments are very different, and you should learn how to
Mhm.
flex your language depending on who
Yes.
you're in front of.
And that's life too,
It is,
right?
absolutely. That's a
Right.
life skill. You got that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a life skill. I tell my students this example, because I mess up a lot too. Uh, I went to this printmaking conference and was in an elevator. I mean, the odds. And somebody came in and was like, "Oh, what kind of work do you make?" And I was caught off guard. I wasn't prepared. This was a long time ago. And I said, "Oh, I'm a printmaker." Girl, you're at a printmaking conference. And they were like,
Duh.
"And?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh my God. Like,
We've
yes.
all done
So
that, right?
yeah,
Yep.
that moment is like burned into my
Yeah.
brain because I was unprepared. It was a moment, right, that I
Yeah.
could have been so good.
Yep.
And because I let my guard down, or I didn't have that little like couple sentences ready, I just fumbled all the way.
It's such a good story, and
Elevator
it's such a
fumble,
good
not
example. Yep. And those are the moments too, and you think back like, oh, dang it. Can't believe I did that.
yeah.
You learn from
So,
it, right?
yeah. Yeah, of
The other
course.
thing you mentioned was about critique and then play. And that's another conversation I had with residents just recently was, I think, kind of in my world, the artists are so focused on making money or making a living, and that they get so focused on like their consumer audience.
For the product, the end.
Exactly.
thing.
And like, what's going to sell? What's going to sell? And they get stuck making either the same thing over and over and over again, which then that doesn't feel fun for an artist. That's not creative. Ooh. Or they get so in their head about the final outcome
Mhm.
that the art sucks. You know, it's like tense, and you can feel it when you look at it that they're like struggling.
Like it's forced in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm like, I don't, my only advice to you is like, shut the door in the studio, turn the music on, and just have some fun. You're never
Yeah.
gonna learn or evolve or grow without failing.
Yes, I 100% agree. I actually, when I do my artist talks, like about my own work, I talk about planning spontaneity.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
if I can get in and just like
Oh yeah,
overdo things, right?
always. Me too. Yep.
And I try to leave room in my practice for that.
Yep.
And then at a certain point, I need to step back and let play, spontaneity, or something like that come in. And that just provides something that I can't do
Yep.
without like making room for it. So like an example of how I work is I do work in collage quite a bit. So I can have control over the flats, right, that I make. So I sometimes use architectural references. So I could do a detailed drawing if I want, right? But at some point, everything's going to get cut up and put together, right, in some sort of unexpected way. So then it gives me both of those things, right? It gives me the control that is satisfying, right? Or the repetition, like that sort of thing. But then it also gives me the spontaneity that for me, just like I just need that, because otherwise, like I could put two pieces next to each other, right? And sometimes it's even frustration. Like I've been so frustrated and it failed and I tried it again and I don't know, it's done. And then people are like, oh, look at that one.
Yeah.
You're like, what? Right?
Yeah.
Like the one that didn't go how you thought it would go is
Yep.
sometimes the one that people gravitate towards.
Absolutely.
And within my practice too, which I know is different than a lot, maybe you and I are the same in
I think we're
this.
similar. Yeah.
When I am making a piece, I have no idea what it's going to look like.
Same.
And some people are like, what? And I was like, I have
Yeah.
no clue what it's going to look like. I know I want these things,
Yep.
right? And then I start working on these things and then they evolve into something else. I am a process person.
Me too.
It's hard to find a printmaker who's not.
Yep.
But right, for me, the end result is it's there, but I relish in the process.
Me too.
That's more interesting. So when you're saying like end product,
Yeah.
I'm more engaged in the process of making and where that's kind of taking me. That's more exciting to me than that final piece.
Yep. I often tell people when I talk about my practice that I spend my days running an arts organization, which is very fun and fulfilling. But sometimes it means I live in spreadsheet land, right? In a very controlled atmosphere where I don't have a lot of creativity. So when I come home after the end of the day, I don't know, I don't think I should probably say turn my brain off, but kind of.
Mhm.
You know, and dive into something that's very different than my day and is not going to add to any kind of stress. And so I think that's why I love process so much. And I also feel like I spent so much time in formal education, right? I know color. I know composition. Like I know those things now to a point where it's almost innate. You know, like you get to a point where like I can mix a color without even thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and like that's an amazing. That to be able to say that is incredible because I think that's really freaking cool. But that's why playing in my studio after work is so fun and fulfilling for me. Is that I am not trying so hard.
Right. You're
I'm
not
not
like trying to learn all the things, which when you're a
exactly.
student, sometimes that's how it feels, right? You're like, I'm
Yes.
trying to do 5 things that are
Yep.
totally new to me
Yeah.
all at the same time.
It's so hard.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of your some people don't like that word, but right,
Yeah.
your style or your right,
Yeah.
developing the tools in your practice. And then
Absolutely.
you have your go-to, right,
Yep.
techniques or go-to colors, like that sort of
Absolutely.
thing.
And I
Yeah.
think about how many times I hated what I was making in school. Like Davy Kohler is way before your time at UWGB, but
I know yeah.
yes, you probably know the lore of Davy
Yes,
Kohler.
yes.
But I had his last design methods class the year he retired. So his last go at design methods, and he is a sketchbook guy. He is like thousands of sketchbooks over his
Mm,
lifetime. And it was all about play and figuring out marks, trying new marks. Like that is probably the ugliest sketchbook I've ever made in my life in that class.
oh, but
Right?
those are the good ones. Yeah.
Those are the good ones. You learn so much from that. And like my love of mark making is probably due to some of that work. And the
Mhm.
marks that my body naturally gravitates towards making are due to that work that I did then. And then I develop new ones when I'm playing.
Yeah. And I think as far like as continuing to learn
Yeah.
too is important, like lifetime lifelong
Yes,
learners of
absolutely.
language doing workshops,
Yep.
or I've taken quite a few like domestica courses,
Yeah, for
and they're
sure.
very specific,
Yep.
like mark making with ink, and you're gonna
Hmm.
have maybe 5 lessons on different
Yep.
things you can do. Some are maybe even a refresher,
Yep.
but like something that gets you out of your head every once in
Yeah.
a while too.
Yep.
Like I did one that was kind of like cartoon drawing in your sketchbook, which is not my like approach. And I was like, well, here we go. And it was really fun, right? It was
That's
really fun. It was
awesome.
different. It got me out of that like
Yep.
routine that maybe sometimes we feel we get stuck in.
For
And
sure. When
then,
you feel like you're
that,
doing the same thing.
yeah, that might find its way into your work somehow in the future. So yeah,
There's an
those things
artist
can be
named,
helpful too.
I think her name is Kasha Avery. Her website's like everythingart.com. And a friend of mine introduced me to her. Every December, she does what she calls an art advent calendar. And it's actually just a 12-day series where she gives you prompts. You work in a sketchbook, and she does like a 2-minute video. And it's one of those things that, like, if I can make the time for it in December, I've done it a couple years now. It's wonderful because she's definitely a different artist than I am.
Mhm,
And she's more comfortable with making a giant mess of her studio than I am, which is a good thing for me to do.
mhm.
Um, and the prompts are great. It's nice to, when you are out of school for a long time, to have a little bit of that
Yeah. And that's a little bit of that community, right? Those opportunities provide you, a
connection.
little cluster of
Yeah.
people, even if it's brief,
Yep,
right, to exchange ideas and look
for
at each
sure.
other's work.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think just even talking to other artists, I think that's probably a good takeaway if anybody is watching this with us.
Hmm.
Find some people.
Yeah. Yes. And it's hard, like even, at the university, we're all like kind of one person areas. We don't get a chance necessarily to like talk about our work with each other very often. I was just on sabbatical last semester, and I had recently like worked on my like summary sort of, of like what happened. And what came up is like I spent a lot of time talking about my work with
Yeah,
people. And I don't think I've been able to do like work in progress.
for sure.
Finished work is different, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
a little more performative, like here's about the work.
Yeah.
But I mean like vulnerable
Yeah.
new work in progress. And
For
I
sure.
really was able to have some in-depth conversations about like and feedback and what do you
Yep.
think, like sort of thing, that was super valuable. And yeah, even you'd think maybe I'd have that more, but I don't, right?
No.
Sometimes you really have to make time and space for those things and have someone, right, to
For
do
sure.
that with. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do have
And
those friends be like, hey, you have a little time, like I need to talk about something, right? Like
yep,
to have a couple people like that, it can be really helpful.
for sure. People that you trust, that you
Mhm.
respect, that you can be vulnerable with. That's a word I talk about a lot in art making is vulnerability and authenticity.
Yeah.
And those are two that I feel very strongly about. And it was kind of really reiterated at the conference I was just at about, you are unique. Your art may not be super, like you may not be doing something that's never been done before, right?
Sure. That's a whole separate conversation.
I'm like, do I even say that?
Yeah.
Open that can of worms for
Yeah.
discussion, right? But you have your own story to tell.
Mhm.
And that's why people connect with artwork. That's why people buy artwork. There's a whole point of why are you trying to be somebody you're not? Or why are you trying to make art that's not authentic to who you are? It's tough.
Mhm. And that's why critiques hurt too.
Yeah. It's like holding
Yes.
my chest, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why it hurts. Yeah, it does, because it's like right here.
Yeah. Or I'll tell my students sometimes, like when I talk to them, or like I don't get nervous, like if
Yeah.
I'm like in class telling them what to do.
Yep.
But if I'm gonna do a talk about my artwork, I still get like a
Absolutely.
little nervous because I'm
Yeah.
talking about other things. They're over here.
For sure.
Right. And then when I start to talk about my work,
Yep.
that gets so much closer to me. And then,
For sure.
right, you're more vulnerable.
Yep.
Right. And yeah, it's, you kind of just have to learn to deal with those feelings.
Yep.
It's not like they're going to ever really go away. Yeah. And that's hard too for people to hear, right? Of like,
Sure.
oh, one day it'll be easy. And it's like, I mean, it's easier,
Yep.
but right, there's still, yeah. And I think for me, some people maybe make art to relax. I sometimes do that, but I like to figure things out. So I
Yeah.
actually create my own problems
Yeah.
and then try to like figure them out. And that's like entertaining for me. And if
Yep.
I'm not entertained, I don't think my work is entertaining, and I
Yeah.
don't expect other people to be entertained by it. So when something clicks and maybe I've done it, like if I know the formula, if I've learned the formula, I'm out. Actually,
Yeah.
I'm like,
We
okay,
are very similar.
I
Yep.
did this. I
Done.
accomplished, I
Yep.
learned the formula, and now I need to change something. So I'm uncomfortable. So I'm
Yep.
vulnerable again, because for me, that's like where the interesting stuff happens.
And I get so bored doing the same thing. Like I
Yep.
can't even force myself to do it if I'm not enjoying the process.
And sometimes it maybe doesn't even look that different. Like I'll go to the people, guys, I've made something
Yeah. Brand new.
nobody's ever done this before. Or you're like, are people going to even know it was me who made it? And then I show them and they're like, yeah, it totally looks like your work, right? But I might be looking at it in a different way or from a different perspective.
Yep.
So I'm looking at it differently, even though my tools are the same, right?
Exactly.
So it's different enough, but yeah. I've done that many times. Now I kind of catch myself where I'll be like, oh, this is a great idea. And then I'm like, wait a second. Let me look at something from 10 years ago. That idea that like I thought was good, but maybe I didn't spend time on it. And it's funny how many of those things like resurface.
Yeah. And it kind of reiterates that you are who you are.
Right.
In some way.
Yeah.
You can't get away from it.
Can't get away from it. That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To your point about vulnerability, I was thinking about the pieces I had recently at New Art Space. They were a series I worked on after my divorce. And so during that process, it was like, I wasn't like showing it, talking about, it was a working through something that was like right here for me.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote a whole artist statement about it. I've been telling everybody about it. They've been up, they've been seen. They're at a bar in De Pere right now,
Sure.
Like you said, once it's done, it's different.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different to talk about like than when you're in it. So
yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that. I was just relating to what you were talking about.
Yeah, and I do think you don't have to you don't have to like show all your wounds necessarily, but that vulnerability, we could also substitute that word for like a universal feeling, right?
Yep.
So if I'm vulnerable in what I'm making in this certain way, I don't have to outline every little thing, but somebody else can connect to that emotion, whatever that emotion is, right? And that's what's so powerful about artwork too. And even as I'm working with students on their artist statements, like this doesn't have to be like a diary, like super everything about you, but kind of summarize in a way. And once you do that, you realize everyone struggles with a lot of these same things, right? Like of, complicated relationships or, self-doubt or those sorts of things. Or on the other end, like the beauty of nature, that sort of thing. Those can be connected to so easily that, you don't have to necessarily share like everything for people to connect to your work.
Exactly. And honestly, that really was my big takeaway from that opening reception, was how many people came up to me and said, I really relate to your journey.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's the part for me that I hope every artist gets a chance to feel, because that's affirming. It is it is absolutely affirming, and it's powerful, and you start to understand that kind of human experience.
Yeah, and that also is like support, right? Like that's
absolutely,
that's a nice feeling, and
it is. You're like, I'm not doing this all by myself.
Yeah.
Other people have been here. It's
Mhm.
great.
Good. I'm glad that show went well for you.
It was wonderful. And Terry and David are just absolutely wonderful people. And I'm so glad we have the new art space in De Pere.
Mhm.
For those of you watching, if you have not been, please go. I just got their press release. They have another opening coming up in April.
Yes, they
I
do.
think
I
it's
think
the
I saw that
12th.
too. It's what?
I think it's April 12th. Yep, the second Friday of each month is when they do art night. So that's when they have their opening reception for that show. I will be at La Vie Tavern in De Pere that night because I have about 15 paintings at their space. So.
At where?
La Vie. It's the tavern right around the corner from where they are. They're starting to curate that space. So.
Well, since we're in this, I'm going to also plug our
Go for it. That's what we're doing.
Senior shows are coming up, and they're going to be at the Art Garage.
Yep.
This year. So we have two, currently our AIR's exhibition is up, Natalie's exhibition, which are some beautiful graphite drawings and some installation. And then we have two senior shows coming up. One is mid-April, exact date, I could look it up, or if you want to plug it in somewhere. It's like mid-April, one towards the end. And we have a pretty big group of students this year. I think one show has like 8 students and one has 10.
It's huge.
Yeah. So I'm excited.
I think they were like 5 when I was there. It was like 5 students.
Yeah, our past couple of years have been on the. We like to do 2 shows. Yes. So there has been time, where maybe we could have done one, but then with 2, people have more space. But this is going to be. This is a big group of people, bigger than we've had maybe in the past year or 2. So.
And I'm so glad it's happening at the Art Garage. I think that's so cool. I know it's because of the lot and space, but I often said when I was at GB that I didn't feel connected to the Green Bay arts community because I felt like the campus was so far away. And now we're talking like many years ago, right?
It still does on the outside. Yeah.
But I think this is a great tie. It's a great way to get those students into a space to see what Green Bay has to offer and start to build that community a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think, with Sage too, right, is nice, with Art Fest, right? Like, we're starting to see maybe, students engage in those things as well. I know I just entered the Sage.
Yeah. I did too. I think this is going to get posted next week, but I think the application closes tomorrow. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes even though, maybe I don't like show in Green Bay a whole lot, sometimes there's these wonderful opportunities that are like, this is great to show, with people from Green Bay. It's I think it's a one night, right?
Yep.
Like sort of thing. Like, why not? Yeah, why not?
And that is, I think, April 20th is their one night reception for that show. That's a show that Tanya Nelson is curating called Analog, for those of you watching. They do the Sage Gallery space downtown. It's off of Pine Street, Washington and Pine. They do what they call one night only events, which I think are so fun and fabulous and a great way to meet other artists, interact with people, see some cool art in a cool space. It makes you feel like you're actually in a city, which hey, I love that. That is so nice in Green Bay. Mm-hmm. And talk about a good place to find your community. Sage is just wonderful for that.
Yeah, if people don't know about that, they should.
Yeah, absolutely. I think their website is Create with Sage. I can put that in the recording too. Since we have a few minutes, I'll keep talking. Was back in our ceramic studio just yesterday or the day before working on something, and I got to talking to a couple of the potters who work in there during the day. And they were saying to me that not only do they love the space and the facility and the materials and all that, but their favorite thing is learning from each other. you know, and talking to each other about what they're working on. And so I feel like that's what this conversation has all been about. It's like
Yes.
people and relationships and networking are so important. And I'm talking about people who are retired, right?
Sure.
Who are retired and have now like discovered an art form, and they're finding their community because it's necessary. It's so hard to just be like, I'm gonna create by myself in my own little vacuum. Like,
Yeah. Yes. And it does make me, that makes me think about, my undergraduate experience. So much was like us hanging. It was like 3 in the morning in the
exactly.
studio, like, come look at this drawing, tell
Yep.
me what's wrong, like sort of environment that
Yeah.
uh I try to like encourage students to develop, but things are different, right? Like
They are.
we
Yep.
didn't. There's more, online sort of opportunities. We didn't, like,
Absolutely.
I wasn't even on Facebook at that
Yeah.
point, right? So like we hung out together physically a lot, and
For
that's
sure.
something I try to like share with students as much as I can. Like being in the same room,
Yep.
right? Like even if you're not talking to each other, just like
Yeah.
working. And then every once in a while, take a break, chat, maybe look at each other's stuff, like those
Yep.
moments. Like you said, right? You don't know how much people know,
Yep.
right? Until you're in that
Yeah.
environment. But if you're only meeting for critique or, those sorts, you kind of miss out on that opportunity. So I'm
Absolutely.
all for late night
Yeah.
studio hangs.
It makes a
We
difference.
we did some things virtually during COVID of like
Yeah.
people just having their, like, we'd both be
Yep.
working and just like
Yep.
chit chatting kind of a little bit,
Yep.
which is kind of fun to do. But
For
I think
sure.
people were kind of sick of just being
Yeah.
on Zoom for
I think
other
so
things.
too.
Like we kind of maxed out, I
Yeah.
think, on our time of it. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about like I do spend a lot of time making art on my own. And as we're talking about it, I'm thinking about that. But I also spend my day in an art studio all day long with artists talking about and showing pictures and things. So I'm like, oh, okay, but I could have probably improved
Yeah.
that a little bit.
You're kind of like taking it home
Yeah,
though. Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Yep. Yeah. I also kind of encourage our artists or kind of give them an opportunity during the residency program to collaborate.
Hmm.
And I think that's an interesting exercise too. And that's coming from somebody who hates group work, like always hated group work. Like, no, thank you. But I think artist collaboration is something that can be super beneficial and super challenging and can help you learn to articulate
Hmm.
better.
I do have
But
my students do, it's a mock thing, but they
okay.
do
Yep.
a mock, like public art proposal.
Okay. Yeah.
So like 3 or 4 of them have to get together, and we do that about at the point of like what, maybe starting to recognize what your like style is, like
Yeah.
what colors do you tend to use, or what themes are important to you, and then smush them together and like how can you create one thing where everyone is happy, but everybody's also had to compromise,
Yeah.
for
Yep.
this like one thing. And I think it's a good like thought exercise. Like you don't have to make it. So then you
Yeah.
can like really go wild in what
Absolutely.
this might look like. But just to, yeah, like negotiate and
Yeah.
speak up, right? Those sorts of things. Like unless you're in those, if you're always by yourself,
Yeah.
you're not like using that muscle.
Right. You never have to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
But also you can leverage each other's skill sets.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing right now in our residency program. We have a glass artist and then a printmaker, and they are collaborating on a piece right now. And I'm very excited about it. And it's putting the two of them to figure out logistics. Like if you're doing a thought exercise, they don't actually have to like mount the thing, right?
Yeah.
So they've had to navigate that. But then both their art forms together, it's the same inspiration. So I'm just excited to see what they do with that and where they go with it. And I think it is helping them both grow as artists.
Mhm.
It's very cool. So
Yeah, and even if in those scenarios, like the final project, it doesn't quite like hit the mark,
yep.
it doesn't matter, right? Like
Yep.
the
No,
important part was that process that got you there, and that you might
absolutely.
then take back to your individual
Yeah.
practices too.
In the second cohort of residents, they did a collaborative project. And when we were setting up the exhibit, they decided it could not be on display, which,
Fair, that's okay too.
right? To me, they still, after four cohorts, they are the closest cohort. They developed the strongest relationships. and they really had the best discussions because they dove in with each other, right? And I think that collaborative project probably helped, and just because it didn't get on display, I kind of wonder where it is right now.
Sure.
Like, I remember that day where they were like, no, it cannot be. It is ugly. It doesn't fit. Like, it's atrocious. But they learned so much from it. Not only like the logistics of making the object, but of working with each other.
Yeah. As you were saying that, it did make me think too, sometimes when a group like is too friendly,
Yeah.
nothing happens.
Yeah.
Or they're like,
Too nice
best
to each other.
buds. Yeah, they're like, what is happening right now? That it almost is more successful when you don't know each other like that well.
Yes.
So you're like trying to learn about each other
Absolutely.
as you go. That does seem to make
Yeah.
a difference.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing I kind of love about this residency program. I feel like this has turned into an advertisement for it. I promise that's not what I'm doing. But we picked 5 people based out of an application pool, and we jury them in. Like, our team does the assessing and picking, and then I kind of have final say because I have to mentor them for a year. So I like to say, like, I have to believe in them, right? I have to believe in them in order to be able to mentor them for the year. And so they don't know each other. Nobody knows each other. So when we start off this year together, the conversations are very much like polite, right?
Yeah.
They're very congenial. And then we get to a point in about the middle of the year where like they can say real things to each other, right? And because they're never friends, because they're not coming into this together. I should back up. We have a husband and wife this year. That's different. But they do kind of develop that, like, I can call you out on your crap.
Yep.
In a safe environment. And so it develops these relationships that are hard to find somewhere else.
Yes, because everybody wants to be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. They want everybody, I don't want everybody to like me. No, that's not what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah, you want constructive feedback.
Absolutely.
Right? And yeah, that's a good place to get it. It's hard to get.
Yep. And especially when they're working on a common goal of having that final exhibit, much like the senior shows at GP, like that's a big lofty thing to pull together as an artist.
Yes.
And so when I have the 5 of them in a room and they're all talking about, they're working on a common goal. So there is a level of supporting each other. But they also hold each other to very high standards, right? Because they want that exhibit to be really good.
Yeah. Yes.
So.
I think too, like some people maybe recognizing about yourself too of how you do with deadlines.
Yeah.
When you're when you're making work and you're by yourself and like honestly, maybe nobody cares if you make artwork or not that week, right? But figuring out what works for you to motivate yourself. And a deadline, right? Some people that might feel too anxious, and that's actually the opposite vibe, right, that they need. But kind of finding what that motivation is for yourself, and also that like accepting that fluctuation of making and not making is okay. I know for me, right, with the academic schedule, when school is in session and we're at midterm sort of time, like that's not a time where I'm making that much. But then the summer tends to be time where I make more. So maybe I'm applying to shows more or framing, right, during the time where teaching is really taking a lot of out of my like energy. And then like kind of figuring out what that roller coaster is for yourself, because you can't do it all equally. You just can't. Right.
We
like
talk about it too.
You have to be your own business, right? There's so many
Exactly.
components that if you can schedule things out and like, okay, today I'm going to work on inventory. Right. Like it's okay that you're not going to like make something that day. And sometimes with teaching, I think like, okay, I didn't maybe make anything today, but I helped someone else make something today. And I can be satisfied. Yeah, with that. Like that's great. I helped a whole bunch of people in their steps, right? Or help them print something. And so something was created. Right? Even if it wasn't. Yeah. Even if it
we talk about like, January and February, there's not art markets going on. Your average consumer is not spending a lot of money. So maybe that is your downtime. That's like you have to try to figure out where your natural ebb and flow is
Yeah.
and what
True. So
works
if
for
you're
you.
doing those summer markets, that
Yeah,
summer is not your time for making. That's your time
no,
for selling, right? Yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
Yep. And so it really does take that like top down. You have to look at what your schedule is and what your goals are,
Hmm.
and then figure out what you can do, what your capacity is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
then having that portfolio to share
yeah.
for those things. And it, like I said in the beginning, right? Just having it done
Yep.
makes everything else easier, right? So then if you
Absolutely.
see an opportunity and the deadline's in a week,
Yep.
you can do it, right? You can do that. It's tomorrow.
Exactly.
You maybe still
Yep.
can do it, right?
Yep.
Because you have all those like components. Your artist statement's done, right? Your bio's
Yeah.
done, your
Yep.
portfolio, you pick a couple images,
Exactly.
fine, off they go.
Yep.
Maybe resize them if they need to be resized. And yeah, so I think
Yep.
having those portfolios going is
Yeah.
very
It makes
helpful.
your life easier, and embracing that it's part of the process, I think, is a mind shift thing. Like
Mm.
for me, last night I was finishing paintings, putting hanging wires on, all of that. And for me, it was getting them out of the studio space so I could make room for the next thing. Like
Mhm.
that was my motivation last night, was like,
Sure.
okay, normally I would just let them sit, but if I varnish them and put their hanging wires on, and take their photos and add them to the inventory, I
Done.
can get them out of my way and I can move on to
Yeah.
my next fun thing.
Oh,
So,
framing and mounting.
yeah,
That stuff takes a
it
lot more
does.
time than people think
Yeah,
too.
and to do it well, oof. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we are past 6:15, and
Oh,
I
okay.
never ever want to take advantage of my speakers. I don't, but I think you and I could probably do this all night if we wanted.
Sure, we could. We could. How much time you
So,
got?
yeah, right. Thank you very much for spending your evening with me. I greatly appreciate it. And we will get this posted online and share it with everybody, and it'll be great.
Okay, well, thank you. It was fun to
Absolutely.
chat.
Yeah, always good to catch up, Lisa. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Yeah.